You can sit over here or you can use one of the plastic chairs. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachare Yamunatira Vanachare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare Gopi Jana Balava Giri Bharadhare Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachare Yamunatira Vanachare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihare Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajik Charis Tadasasi Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. Shishi Radha Radhanath Ki. Sri Giri Govardhan Ki. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki. Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki. Gaur Premanande. All glories to their assembled devotees. All glories to their assembled devotees. All glories to their assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Arjuna Charan Prabhu, my microphone is coming quite loudly over our sound system here. I don't know if it's meant to be. It has never been like that. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 3, talks between Lord Shiva and Sati. And we're reading verse 10. And just as a matter of interest, I assume verse 10 is on the sheet. Is it on the sheet? What's the next verse after 10? 11. Oh, really? Okay. All right, because it says number 10 has quite a short purport. Tatra swasrir me nano bartre samita matre shwasri klina diyam cha mataram drakshye chirotkanta mana maharshibir uniyamanam cha mridadvara Dwajam. Tatra swasriya me nanubratri samhita. Matri swasri klina diyam cha mataram. Drakshye chirot kanta mana maharshi bir. Uniyamanam chamridadvaradvajam. Tatra swasrir me nanubratri samhitam. Matri swasri klina diyam cha mataram. Drakshye chirot kanta mana maharshi bir. Uniyamanam chamridadvaradvajam. Tatra swasriya me nanubratri samita. Matri swasri klina diyam cha mataram. Drakshye chirot kanta mana maharshi bir. Uniyamanam chamridadvaradvajam. Tatra, their swasri, own sisters, may, my, nano, surely, Bhartri Samhita, along with their husbands, Matri Swasri, the sisters of my mother, Klinadiyam, affectionate, Cha, and Mataram, mother, Drakshye, I shall see, Chira Utkantamana, being very anxious for a long time, Maharishibhi, by great sages, Uniyamanam, being raised, Cha, and Mrida, O Shiva, Advara, sacrifice, Dwajam, flags. Translation, my sisters, my mother's sisters and their husbands, and other affectionate relatives must be assembled there. So if I go, I shall be able to see them, and I shall be able to see the flapping flags and the performance of the sacrifice by the great sages. For these reasons, my dear husband, I'm very much anxious to go. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As stated before, the tension between the father-in-law and son-in-law persisted for a considerable time. Sati, therefore, had not gone to her father's house for a long while. Thus, she was very anxious to go to her father's house, particularly because on that occasion her sisters and their husbands and her mother's sisters would be there. As is natural for a woman, she wanted to dress equally to her other sisters and also be accompanied by her husband. She did not, of course, want to go alone. Tatraswasri ame nanu Bhartri Samhita, Matriswasri Klinadiyam Chamataram, Drakshyecherot Kantamana Maharshabir, Uniyamanam Chamridadvaradvajam. My sisters, my mother's sisters, and their husbands, and other affectionate relatives must be assembled there. So if I go, I shall be able to see them, and I shall be able to see the flapping flags and the performance of the sacrifice by the great sages. For these reasons, my dear husband, I'm very anxious to go. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyatyadesh Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanitananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So Sati is continuing with her appeal. And it's sort of step by step. You know, the first verse, this is the third. I think this is the third of her appeal to go. And the first one was very polite. If you want to go, I'll go with you. But now it's becoming more sort of straightforward in the sense that she wants to go. And surely she's well enough aware that her husband doesn't want to go, although he has not said as much yet, but he is definitely going to in a verse or a few verses. But she's just driven by her desire. And Srila Prabhupada, particularly the previous purport, the previous verse and purport, Srila Prabhupada was emphasizing, you could say, or discussing certain aspects of the natures of conditioned souls who are embodied in the bodies of female human beings. We can put it that way. Here he's taking it a little further. We don't want to sort of come across like we're trying to bash the ladies, because we're not trying to. But certain things are being pointed out, have been pointed out, are being pointed out, and they're of course worthy of note and important to note. We hope none of the ladies are feeling too sort of, guilty or anxious about these things. Anyway, it is mentioned here that Sati wanted to dress up nicely. She had that sort of attraction. She liked to do that. She wanted to do that, to dress up nicely and then go and associate with the sisters, who would also, of course, be dressed up nicely. And she wanted to be dressed up equally. Not better than, but definitely not worse than. Yes, and she also wanted to be accompanied by her husband and not just go alone. As we mentioned yesterday, some people talk about the male ornament. So, anyway, these points are there. But one thing that has struck me, I must say, I think it was the previous verse. Yes, the previous verse. The previous verse and this verse. They have mentioned, they've mentioned very clearly that the particular, that she was also attracted to just the event. It wasn't just that she was missing her relatives, and it was not just that she wanted to make a point of being seen to be no less nicely dressed and ornamented and like that than the other ladies there. It's a very nice point, it's a very interesting point, that she really wanted to go to the sacrifice. The event was a very attractive event. Kind of, it wasn't just a social event as such, like a birthday party or some sort of family get-together. The context was this big sacrifice, some major sacrifice. Daksha was in the practice of holding big sacrifices, and we read just a few verses before how sometime before this, at the actual sacrifice where the whole all the arguments and eventually cursing and all that broke out, that it was a big sacrifice. He specialized in big sacrifices, not just some ordinary little thing, but really very big sacrifices. So the previous one, he started off, it was a 2-stage sacrifice. It started off with a Vajapaya sacrifice, and then went on to, what was it, Brihaspati Savana, I think, or Brihaspati something. So it was a 2-stage fire sacrifice. Gosh, which only people like these could really do, because vast quantities of different things. Ghee, of course, what to speak of ghee. But jewelry, gold, would be used and would be offered as gifts to the participants, the audience. So it was really quite a big thing. And as one of the verses said, but I saw it, but I didn't note it, I didn't say anything about it, was, or maybe it was the previous one. It was it was the previous one. So, this is in verse 3. Samarabhe kratutamam. Kratu. Kratu is a particular type of Vedic sacrifice, very Vedic, from the 4 Vedas, or the corollary literatures, the Brahmanas and other literatures. Very strict Vedic sacrifice from the 4 Vedas, with all sorts of very specific arrangements of people sitting in different places, and different people who are sitting in the different places participating in different ways at different times. It's a sort of major operation, you could say. So this one, well, actually, is it this one? No, it's not. So, yeah, that was the previous one. Or maybe it was this one, actually. Actually, it was this one. He's repeating the same sacrifice, Vajapaya, which is kratutamam, the best of sacrifices, the word for word says, but the best of that sort of sacrifice, the best of all sacrifices was the Ashvamedha. That was the biggest. But the point that struck me, and I do feel it's an important point worthy of mention, is that in those days, these things were really big events, including big social events. It wasn't like, let's go to the Bollywood movie type of social event, or let's go to the, rock and roll concert, Bollywood rock and roll. Are you aware they have Bollywood rock and roll? Anyway, Hare Krishna. They do. They're advancing. Taking up rock and roll and other types of crazy music. So yes, this in and of itself, the event, it wasn't just that the relatives will be there, it'll give a chance to dress up and in a sense, sort of show off. But yes, in those days, great sacrifices, like I'm sure you've all been to some weddings within Hindu society in South Africa, and it's a big event. But when it comes to the sacrifice, a lot of the people, they just go outside. A lot of the men go out, smoke cigarettes, talk about whatever. Yeah. And some of the more die-hard types stay for the sacrifice, although, well, anyway, wedding ceremonies, there's certain things that people know. But the actual sacrifice, the components of the actual sacrifice, the fire yajna itself, they probably don't appreciate. They just think it's some sort of big havan. But at these times, the people, the demigods, they really liked to participate in these sacrifices. They were really big events. And not when it came to the fire sacrifice, it's time to sort of tune out and drop out the door and just go and chit and chat and wait till the food is served. So, yeah, it's interesting, the social environment and the consciousness of the people. Just like we know that going back to those times, and more recently also, that philosophical debates were major social events, and people would become followers of different philosophers. And when the philosopher was having a debate, they go there to really, cheer for their favorite philosopher, and not so much to cheer for their football team, Manchester United, or the All Blacks from New Zealand. Oh, Krishna, save us. Not really like that. But they go to support their favorite philosopher. And even before this lifetime, but back at the turn of the previous century, there was this one, there were a number of philosophers, and they were real social people, socially known, and they had followings. And it wasn't just for some smaller percentage of the university students, some just very abstruse and difficult to understand philosophy. These things were very popular. Philosophers were very popular. And the one who I studied a bit in university, Bertrand Russell, he was a real popular man. He had a real following. So it's interesting, the social environment, what becomes popular, and and who those things become popular with. So in this case here, the people in Vedic society, they're much more pious. And so something like a fire yajna was just something not to be missed, because it was really an enthralling and just deeply moving event, at the end of which different demigods and other personalities would appear and give benedictions of different sorts. And so it was these types of things were greatly appreciated by that type of person. People are on a higher level. Yes. So, of course, for devotees, just like this weekend, devotees are trying to organize major kirtan festivals. I don't know if or what we're going to try and do here. Did you hear anything, Swarup Damodar Prabhu? You heard? We're going to try and do something, right? For the chanting of the holy names, first and foremost, but also for peace. As you probably, I don't know if you're aware or not, but the Russians are destroying Ukraine, absolutely destroying it. It's amazing. And our devotees, our main temple, the devotees today are having to abandon and just leave it. And I don't know about the big deities, which weigh more than 1 ton, if each, what they're doing about the deities. But, so, anyway, but the point is that due to the character of certain people, the characters of people, they're attracted to different types of events. So as devotees, we like to have kirtan events. And of course, people who are attracted to different types of events will tend to get results sort of in keeping with whatever they're attracted to. So, it was very horrible, but in a certain sense it was ironic that in Paris some few years ago, at a major concert of a, would you believe, death metal rock and roll group, in came a whole lot of terrorists and just slaughtered, many of them. Obviously it's just a horrible thing. It's such Kali Yuga. But the event was such a Kali Yuga event. Yeah. And, for our devotees in Ukraine, of course, it's a shocking situation, to put it mildly. But it'll be very interesting to see what comes in due course by Krishna's arrangement. Some things will come by Krishna's arrangement. Yes, so this is Vedic society, and therefore, even though ladies, men, children, different categories of people have attractions which are still current in certain respects at least. But at the same time, they have other attractions to other types of activities in terms of their higher characters, their higher attractions, their higher interests. Hare Krishna, devotees. I didn't think there was so much to say about that. Any comments or questions? Words of wisdom? Devotees.
Maharaj, we see Sati has this diplomatic behavioral pattern. Can diplomacy be used in devotional service?
That's an interesting question. Well, yes, just about everything can be used in devotional service. Just about everything. And, one thing is diplomacy in a dishonest sense. Even there's a place for that, you can say, because in the beginning of the 10th canto, when Kamsa is just about to kill Devaki, and Vasudeva, who was a real, he was a minister, he was like a real politician. He knew how to talk and influence people. So he spoke to Kamsa to pacify him and stop him wanting to kill Devaki, and he succeeded. But as is pointed out there, he uses blatant diplomacy. Oh, best of the human beings, or things like that, when actually Kamsa is just he's just a super horrible person. He's not the best of anything. But Vasudeva uses that diplomacy, and in one way or another, Kamsa accepts it, and therefore doesn't kill Devaki. If Vasudeva, he's a Kshatriya, so he's not like a warrior Kshatriya, but he still is a Kshatriya, so he's had some military training. He understands, obviously, I have to defend my wife. I have to. Even if I die, I just have to do it. But he knew that if I pull out my sword and have a go at Kamsa, that's just the end. It's just simple. It's just a simple thing. There's no chance. It's sort of like Ukraine against Russia. There's just no chance. There's simply no chance. So he resorted to what was his expertise, which was to talk, and he was quite dishonest. But Kamsa was influenced by it. Because, another funny example is when Sanatana Goswami was imprisoned and he wanted to escape, so he bribed. That was one thing he did. He gave the guard, or whatever the fellow was, he gave him a few $1 million, actually, some thousands of gold coins. But then he was diplomatic and said, actually, I forget the exact wording, but you are practically the personification of religion, that sort of thing. And the man thought, Yes. At last someone has appreciated me. And he let him go. Even for all the money, it seemed he was not going to let him go. But when he flattered him like mad, then the fellow let him go. But, so that's one thing, dishonesty. Dishonesty. In a Krishna conscious dishonesty? Dishonesty for the purposes of Krishna consciousness. But another thing is just to tell, and this is really more and not just more, but this is what we should do. We should be able to present the truth in, whatever, particularly philosophically, but even in terms of just interpersonal dealings and things, we should be able to present the truth palatably so that people will feel inclined to accept. Like if you just bash people philosophically, then, maybe you'll get some humble people may accept, but others will become disturbed. Who do you think you are speaking to me like that? So there's it's quite a famous, not a saying, but just a presentation made to illustrate the principle. And what it is that I am strong-willed. You are stubborn, and he is pig-headed. You're talking about exactly the same thing, but in 3 ways. You follow? Yeah. So, either case could be taken to be the truth. but it's the same thing being talked about by 3 people with 3 different perspectives. And if you tell someone, oh, you're very strong-willed, then, in many cases they'll think, oh, that's nice. But if you tell the same person about the same thing that they have said, that actually you're stubborn, then they probably will not appreciate. And if you tell them, listen, you're just pig-headed, they're going to be offended, and they won't want to engage in any ongoing discussion with you. So like this, we have to be thoughtful, because oftentimes, in a situation where someone tells another person, you're just pig-headed, it means that person who's speaking that, they've just lost control of themselves. Yeah. And they've just succumbed to lower urges just to have an outburst. Whereas, if anyone could have been excused for having an outburst in a situation, it would have been Vasudeva when his wife was going to be killed. Yeah, but he didn't, because he was a minister. He was practiced in diplomacy, politics, an interpretation of the word politics is the art of being polite. Is politics. And that's why, probably not now, but previously, when the President of America met Mr. Putin, they would be all smiles and shaking hands. And you think, oh, a couple of friends just met up again after a while. But actually they just hate each other with a vengeance, literally.
Thank you, Maharaj, for your answer. The other thing you talk about, Brendan Russell, I remember
Bertrand.
Previously you told us about a philosophy of doubt that you studied.
That was, I think, was Wittgenstein.
Wittgenstein,
I think. It was someone before, the philosophy of the doubt. If you look it up, if you Google it, you'll find it.
Okay, thank you.
Because, it's on the material level, it's not a bad idea. Don't be gullible. Yeah, because there's so much cheating. If not wholesale, at least partial cheating that goes on. And in my youth, there was a famous song, Won't Be Fooled Again. Do you remember that, or was that before your time? The Who, Won't Be Fooled Again. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. So here we see like Sati, she's a pure devotee, but like due to family attachments, material attachments are becoming strengthened. So in our relationships with family and devotees, how do we make sure that our relationships don't encourage material attachments, but rather become spiritually beneficial?
Well, yes, that's very important because, there's deep-rooted attachments beyond what we may really be consciously aware of. But, just in general, with family members or old friends even, we should, of course, try to introduce Krishna consciousness to them. And as much as is practical, like I said earlier, bashing generally doesn't work with anyone, really. So, one has to be sensitive. One has to try to present, of course. One has a duty, an obligation to try and help, particularly like parents, because one is greatly indebted to one's parents materially. So one has an obligation to try to help them with Krishna consciousness, but one has to see whether or to what degree they accept, and beyond what point they won't accept. So then, if, for example, if they're really not going to accept, and it's just clear, then, just like when we're distributing books, when we're preaching to people, just in general, we're talking to someone, and we're trying to interest them, but then it becomes clear, this person is not going to respond. Then we move on to the next person. We don't just stay with the person, because it'll be a waste of time, and time is so extremely valuable. Yeah. So therefore, of course one should basically always be courteous and respectful with one's parents. But as far as really spending time with them in a very sort of material, social and psychological environment, best not to. For people like that, best to give them prasadam. And one will see afterwards what effects are there on the consciousness. Yeah. If it has negative effects on the consciousness, then definitely that's a situation to avoid for the future. Hare Krishna. Oh, yes.
My question is just branching off from Justin's question, actually. If one's preaching to one's parents ends up in the parents taking up a demigod worship and they don't want to hear anything about the Vishnu Tattva, is it better to just leave them be then?
Yeah, or give them... I mean, it would depend on the sort of basic nature of the relationship. If there's a chance of influencing them further, you should try. But if it's clear that, these people are just not going anywhere and are determined not to go anywhere spiritually, then give them prasadam from time to time and like that.
Well, more specifically, my father took up Ganesh worship, and he's been chanting Ganesh mantra for 3 years now, daily. It's quite amazing. So, Krishna consciousness, when we preach, not everybody takes up mantra to that degree, but he seems to be doing some sort of advancement. He's getting some nice realizations from his, japa or something like that. He has his chanting beads, even Ganesh Murti now. It's really bizarre. I try to explain him about Vishnu Tattva and where Ganesh stands, and he's getting his power anyway from Nishingadev. He says that he's able to accept that fact, but he would still like to stick with Ganesh.
Okay. He's Hindi, North Indian then, I guess.
Very, very northern Indian, yes.
The far north.
General continent is same, yeah.
With someone like that, it's probably worth persevering to some degree, but not like going to live with them. Something like that. Well, what I used to do with my parents when they were living, I would go for a few days every year. And they helped. I don't know if they would have helped less if I didn't go, but they actually helped quite a lot. Yeah. And my father was sort of mildly interested. But I just went for a few days a year. That's what I did. Until they died. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
His Holiness Srila Bhakti Chaitanya Swami Maharaj ki
jai. Can I just ask a question? Today's the disappearance day of Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj. Are we having a program of any sort? Not. Okay. Well, what I thought we could do for those who are interested is this evening we could just talk about him and his life, and in our class, at, 5:30? So let's do that. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki jai.